Nicholas Gray was the enigmatic owner of Graytech Industries, a cutting-edge software company known for its rapid success and groundbreaking projects. But lately, Nicholas had grown uneasy. Profits were steady, yet employee morale seemed to shift. Rumors whispered through the executive floor about certain toxic attitudes festering within the company's culture. So, one stormy Monday morning, Nicholas devised a plan. Without telling a soul, he arrived at work dressed in an old, faded uniform with cleaning services embroidered across the chest. His usually sleek hair was tucked under a cap, and glasses he'd never worn before slid down his nose. For the next 2 weeks, Nicholas would work undercover as Nick, the night janitor. Nicholas cleaned after hours, quietly taking mental notes. Most employees ignored him entirely, which he expected. But soon enough, patterns emerged. In the break room, he overheard snide remarks. The janitor missed a spot again, someone sneered. What's new? Probably can't even read, another chuckled. They didn't recognize him. These were senior developers, people Nicholas had once trusted. But things escalated. One evening, while mopping near the design team's area, Nicholas accidentally bumped into a stack of papers, sending them fluttering to the floor. Before he could apologize, Lena, the head of UX, shot him a glare. Seriously? Can you not be useless for 5 minutes? She snapped. Her teammates erupted into laughter. Feeling the burn of humiliation, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, Nicholas simply nodded, cleaned up the mess, and left without a word. But his mind was already working. He documented every comment, every sneer, every arrogant laugh. And just when he thought he had seen the worst of it, fate handed him one last piece. Late one night, as he emptied trash bins, he overheard Lena and 2 department heads in a heated conversation. Honestly, Lena scoffed, this place is a joke. Nicholas Gray? The guy barely shows up anymore. I bet I could run this company better than him in my sleep. One of the others laughed. Maybe the janitor should take over. He's here more than the boss. Unbeknownst to them, the conference room had security cameras. Nicholas flagged the footage. Now he had evidence, not just of their rudeness, but of their utter contempt for the very company that paid them 6-figure salaries. On Friday, a company-wide meeting was called. Employees buzzed with curiosity. Nicholas Gray rarely addressed the whole staff. As they filled the auditorium, Nicholas stepped onto the stage, wearing the same janitor's uniform. Whispers spread like wildfire. And then, with a wry smile, Nicholas removed his cap and glasses. The color drained from Lena's face. Others shifted uncomfortably. Good afternoon, Nicholas began. Over the past 2 weeks, many of you may have seen me working as the night janitor. Or rather, you thought you saw a janitor. The silence was palpable. You see, I wanted to understand the real culture of Graytech. I wanted to see how my employees treated people they thought were beneath them. He paused. And, unfortunately, what I found was a workplace that has forgotten its values. Nicholas then played the security footage. The room watched, horrified, as Lena's words echoed through the speakers. When the video ended, Nicholas calmly announced, effective immediately, those involved in fostering this toxic behavior are terminated. Their replacements will be reminded of the importance of respect, regardless of someone's job title. But Nicholas wasn't done. And one last thing, he added, we're establishing a new company program. Every executive will spend 1 week per year working alongside our cleaning, cafeteria, and security teams. Call it empathy training. The room erupted into applause. Except for a few vacant seats where Lena and her cronies once sat. Nicholas smiled. Balance restored. Or so he thought. Months later, Nicholas received an anonymous package. Inside was a flash drive containing files stolen from Greytech's most sensitive projects. Along with a simple note. "You should have been nicer to the janitor." Nicholas leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. It seemed his test was just the beginning of a much larger game. And this time, the stakes were higher than dignity, they were life or death for the company. Nicholas stared at the note, his mind racing. The handwriting was unfamiliar, sharp and jagged like someone trying to disguise their style. But the real problem wasn't the note, it was the flash drive. Plugging it into his secure laptop, Nicholas found documents that only 5 people in the company should have access to. Financial forecasts, prototypes for unreleased products, and confidential partnership deals, all perfectly organized as if someone was preparing to sell them. And worst of all, the metadata on the files showed they had been copied 3 weeks ago. That was right in the middle of his undercover janitor operation. While I was watching them, someone was watching me. Nicholas immediately locked down the company's networks and called an emergency meeting with his most trusted security officer, David. David scanned the files and frowned. "This is an inside job." "No doubt. But they're clever. Whoever did this bypassed every digital tripwire we set." Nicholas rubbed his temples. Lena and her team were just the surface problem. This goes deeper. And then came the real shock. David pulled up the system logs. "Nicholas, according to this, the files were downloaded from your personal account." Nicholas's blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I didn't." "Unless someone else had your credentials," David said darkly. "Or your laptop." But there was only one time his laptop had left his sight. One night during his janitor shift when someone offered to help clean the CEO's office. And that someone was Mark, the cheerful, seemingly harmless head of facilities. Nicholas played back security footage from that night. There was Mark, whistling, wiping down tables, and carrying a small USB device. The timestamps matched perfectly. And that's when Nicholas remembered Mark had been one of the few people who treated him kindly during his janitor stint. Why would he? Nicholas wondered aloud. David raised an eyebrow. "Might want to ask him yourself." But when they went to Mark's office, it was empty. Desk cleared. Locker stripped. Mark was gone. 2 days later, Nicholas received another anonymous email. This time with a video attached. In it, Mark appeared, sitting in some undisclosed location, smirking at the camera. "Nicholas. You thought Lena was your problem? She was just noise. The real players are much bigger. Greytech has enemies you don't even know exist yet. I didn't take your files to sell them. I took them to protect them. From what's coming." Nicholas leaned forward, heart pounding. "Oh, and by the way," Mark added, "some of your employees aren't who you think they are. Including the ones you're about to promote." Then the video cut to black. Suddenly, Nicholas realized this wasn't about workplace culture anymore. This was corporate espionage. A full-blown infiltration. Enemies within the walls. And the man he thought was just a kind-hearted janitor? He might be the only person who could save the company. Or the one who would finally destroy it. Nicholas barely slept that night. He replayed Mark's video over and over, analyzing every word, every glance, searching for hidden meanings. Mark didn't seem afraid. If anything, he looked like a man who knew exactly how this would unfold and was already 10 steps ahead. By morning, Nicholas made a decision. He wasn't going to wait for this unseen threat to make its next move. He was going to find Mark and get the truth out of him directly. The problem was, Mark had vanished without a trace. His bank accounts were emptied, his phone disconnected, and security footage from his neighborhood showed him leaving his apartment with nothing but a single backpack. Nicholas instructed David to dig into Mark's history, see if there were any patterns, contacts, anything unusual. Within hours, David returned with something Nicholas hadn't expected. Mark wasn't Mark. At least, not the way anyone at Greytech thought. His real name was Marcus Hale, former cybersecurity expert, once employed by one of Greytech's biggest competitors. He had vanished from the industry 5 years ago after allegedly exposing his own company's illegal data harvesting operation. Some called him a whistleblower. Others called him a traitor. And now, apparently, he'd been living under their noses this entire time, running the facilities team like it was just another day job. Nicholas felt the walls closing in. Every face around him seemed suddenly unfamiliar. How many others were wearing masks? He called an emergency board meeting. But halfway through the session, Nicholas's phone buzzed with a restricted number. Against his better judgment, he answered. A voice, distorted and low, spoke without greeting. Don't trust the board. One of them is already compromised. Before Nicholas could respond, the line disconnected. He looked around the table at his board members. Smiles. Nods. Papers shuffling. But now it all felt like theater. After the meeting ended, he quietly asked David to run background checks on every member of the board. And not the usual corporate checks, deep dives. Offshore accounts, secret communications, anything. David nodded once and disappeared without a word. That evening, as Nicholas sat alone in his office, lights dimmed and the city sprawling out beyond the glass, an email appeared on his screen. No sender. No subject. Just a message. Check the janitor's closet on level B3. Midnight. Come alone. Nicholas debated every possible outcome. It screamed trap. But doing nothing felt worse. By midnight, he found himself descending to the sublevels of Greytech, the parts of the building most employees didn't even realize existed. The janitor's closet on B3 was tucked behind a service hallway, metal door slightly ajar. Nicholas pushed it open slowly, heart pounding. Inside, under the flicker of a single fluorescent bulb, was Mark. He held up his hands as if to say, "Relax." "I didn't steal your data," Mark said calmly. "I saved it. And if you don't listen to me very carefully, you're going to lose everything." Nicholas shut the door behind him. "Start talking." Mark leaned against a shelf and gestured around them. Greytech has been targeted by a consortium. Private investors, rival companies, some of your own board members. They're planning to take over from the inside. Your janitor experiment? It exposed the small fish. But the big ones, they're still swimming right next to you. Nicholas struggled to process it. "Why are you helping me?" Mark smirked. "Because what they're after, it's not just your company. It's a prototype you're working on. Project Aeon. They'll tear Greytech apart to get it." Nicholas's blood ran cold. Project Aeon wasn't public. Barely anyone knew the name. "How do you know about Aeon?" "I know because I used to work for them," Mark said. "And I know exactly how they operate. They're already in. The question is, are you ready to fight back?" Nicholas felt the shift in his own mind then. The janitor test had started as a way to clean up office culture. But now he realized the company itself needed saving. And the only ally he had was a man who'd spent years hiding under his nose. Nicholas extended his hand. "What's the plan?" Mark grinned and shook it. "First, we fake your downfall. Make them believe they've already won. Then, we take the fight to them." And as they mapped out the first steps of the counterattack, Nicholas realized the real test hadn't even started yet. Mark spoke quickly, his voice low and urgent, as though the walls themselves might be listening. He laid out a plan so audacious Nicholas almost laughed at the insanity of it. But there was no humor in Mark's eyes. "We leak a fake breach," Mark explained. "Make it look like the company's most valuable data, Project Aeon, your financials, future patents, have all been compromised. You give a public statement, full of panic, announce you're stepping down. Say you've lost control. Say Greytac is finished." Nicholas frowned. "And the point of that is, what? To hand them the victory?" "No," Mark said. "To force them out of the shadows. They want the company, but only if it's still breathing. If they think you're weak, if they think you're out, they'll make their move. They'll step into the light. And that's when we hit back." Nicholas leaned against the wall, rubbing his hands over his face. Every instinct in him screamed against the idea. But what choice did he have? They were already inside the company. Somewhere among his trusted circle, his friends, his colleagues, sat the people plotting to rip it apart. It took less than 48 hours to set the stage. Nicholas called a press conference. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted over one another, and Nicholas, wearing a somber expression, stepped up to the microphone. With deep regret, he began, "I must inform you that Greytac has suffered a significant internal breach. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO. Our future is uncertain." The headlines were everywhere within the hour. Stock prices tumbled. Social media buzzed with theories. Internally, chaos erupted. And just as Mark predicted, vultures began to circle. Two board members, ones Nicholas had always thought of as loyal, Claire and Jordan, suddenly called for an emergency vote. They wanted to save the company, they said. Restore stability. But their proposal was clear, a full acquisition by an anonymous group of private investors, with Claire as interim CEO. Mark handed Nicholas a file just before the meeting. "Recognize any of these names?" he asked. Nicholas stared at the list. Offshore accounts. Shell companies. Layers of shadow ownership. But behind it all, he recognized one name, Victor Lang. Victor had been a rival since the early days. His company, Novodyne, had tried and failed to outpace Greytac for years. Now, it seemed, Victor had stopped trying to beat Greytac from the outside. He decided to swallow it from within. At the boardroom table, Claire laid out her pitch. Jordan backed her up. They spoke in smooth, rehearsed phrases about the good of the company, protecting the employees, stabilizing the market. Nicholas let them finish. Then he smiled. "Interesting," he said. "Because just this morning, our cybersecurity team traced the breach back to 2 internal accounts. Guess which ones?" The silence was absolute. Claire's face drained of color. Jordan shifted in his seat. Nicholas tossed the file onto the table. "Yours." Before either of them could speak, David entered the room with a team of federal agents. The timing was perfect. Claire and Jordan were led out of the building in handcuffs. But Nicholas knew it wasn't over. Victor Lang was still out there. And if Victor was willing to play this dirty, there would be more moves coming. Bigger ones. Later that night, Mark and Nicholas met again in the janitor's closet. "That was the easy part," Mark said. "Victor won't make the next move through proxies. He'll come at you directly. Gray tech is just the start. Project Aeon is what he really wants." Nicholas nodded slowly. "Then we don't just defend it. We go after him. Expose him. Burn down everything he's built." Mark smiled faintly. "Good. Because he's already coming for you. And next time, he won't wait for an invitation." As the city lights flickered beyond the windows and the building settled into an eerie quiet, Nicholas realized there was no going back to normal. Not now. Not ever. The janitor's test was over. The war had begun. The following morning, Nicholas received an encrypted message on his private line. It was a direct transmission, routed through layers of proxies, yet the sender left no doubt about their identity. It simply read, "I warned you to stay small. Now watch how kings fall. V." Nicholas stared at the screen. Victor Lang wasn't hiding anymore. And that meant the real storm was about to begin. Mark was already waiting in his office. He didn't look surprised when Nicholas showed him the message. "He's accelerated his timeline," Mark said. "And if I know Victor, he's not coming after the company anymore. He's coming after you." Nicholas exhaled slowly. "What do you mean?" Mark slid a tablet across the table. Photos filled the screen. Nicholas's home. His family's cabin. His sister's apartment. All taken in secret over the past few days. "It's not just business anymore," Mark said quietly. "You made it personal when you exposed his people. Now he'll go after anything that makes you human." For a moment, Nicholas felt a rare flicker of fear. This was no longer some boardroom game. This was an operation. And Victor Lang had unlimited resources, no conscience, and years of revenge simmering beneath the surface. "We need to disappear," Mark said. "Not for long. Just long enough to hit back hard. We take the fight to him, but we do it on his turf." Nicholas frowned. "Which is where exactly?" Mark smiled grimly. "Shanghai." By that evening, Nicholas and Mark were on a private jet, leaving behind decoys and false trails. David stayed behind to run interference, feeding Victor's spies just enough fake intel to keep them busy. But Shanghai was different. This wasn't the world of Silicon Valley anymore. This was Victor's backyard. They landed under the cover of night. Mark led Nicholas through a maze of safe houses and abandoned warehouses, finally arriving at an old tech lab that looked like it hadn't been used in years. But inside, screens glowed, servers hummed, and a small team of operatives worked quietly. Nicholas looked around. "Who are they?" Mark smirked. "People like me. People Victor burned. We've been waiting for a reason to shut him down permanently." Nicholas couldn't believe it. For years, Victor had been quietly making enemies out of the best minds in the industry. And now, here they were, hidden in the shadows, preparing for his downfall. The plan was simple on paper. Break into Victor's central data hub, extract the files proving his years of corporate sabotage, and leak them to the global media. Ruin him, not just legally, but publicly. Turn him from a predator into prey. But simple plans never stayed simple. On the night of the breach, just as Mark and Nicholas were about to enter Victor's facility, they found the security already disabled. Mark froze. "That's not possible. We haven't even touched the systems yet." They pushed inside cautiously, and what they found chilled Nicholas to his core. The entire server room was already wiped. Not stolen. Not encrypted. Burned. And on one of the remaining screens, a video looped. Victor himself, sitting in a leather chair, smiling directly into the camera. "Good evening, Nicholas," he said. "I thought you might come. So I cleaned up ahead of you. But thank you for confirming my suspicions, now I know exactly who's been helping you." Victor leaned forward. "See you soon." The feed cut out. Mark cursed under his breath. "He's playing us." He always was. This was never about Aon or the company. He wanted us here. Out of position. Away from home. Nicholas felt the pieces sliding into place, too late to stop them. "Great tech," he said. "We left David behind." Mark's face darkened. "We have to move. Now." As they scrambled to exfil, Nicholas realized this wasn't just about taking Victor down anymore. Victor was already making his final move. And by the time Nicholas got back, there might not be a company left to save. Or a friend left alive. With a sick feeling growing in his gut, Nicholas and Mark raced back to the airport, every hour feeling like a year. Nicholas barely spoke on the flight home, staring out the window into the dark, silent sky. His mind replayed every warning sign, every missed clue. He'd thought they were outmaneuvering Victor. Instead, they'd walked straight into his trap. When they landed, it was worse than Nicholas feared. Greytech's headquarters were surrounded. Media vans, police, government officials, the whole building locked down under the guise of a formal investigation. Reports of financial crimes, security failures, and insider trading filled the news. And David was missing. No answers. No trace. Just gone. Nicholas watched from a distance, the company he built now a crime scene, his people confused and frightened behind the glass walls. Victor had orchestrated a complete collapse in less than 48 hours. He hadn't just come for the company. He'd come to erase Nicholas entirely. Back in the safe house, Nicholas paced the floor while Mark worked furiously on a laptop, digging through whatever digital fingerprints Victor had left behind. "He's sloppy when he's overconfident," Mark muttered. "He's not hiding anymore. He thinks you're finished, so he's getting lazy." Nicholas turned. "Then that's our chance." And it was. In the encrypted backend of Greytech's server logs, Mark found a secret data relay, a private line Victor had been using to monitor the company remotely. More than that, it connected directly to Victor's own network. "What if we don't fight him directly?" Nicholas said, an idea forming fast. "What if we let him win?" Mark frowned. "You want to lose?" "No. I want him to believe he won. I want to hand him Project Aon myself. Personally. In public. On record. Make it so big, so official, that he can't resist taking credit for it. And while he's celebrating, we drain him dry." The final act came together quickly. Nicholas scheduled a global press conference. Standing in front of Greytech's sealed headquarters, looking weary and defeated, he announced he was selling off Project Aon to a private international partner to cover the company's debts and secure its future. Within minutes, Victor's shadow companies moved in, purchasing the fake assets. But what Victor didn't know was that the entire transaction was a trap. Mark had designed Aon's files to carry a stealth program. Once Victor downloaded them, the virus went to work, cracking open his hidden servers, copying decades of evidence, financial records, communications, and deals with corrupt officials. By the time Victor realized what was happening, it was too late. The next morning, every major news outlet in the world ran the story. Victor Lang exposed, corporate espionage ring shut down. By noon, Victor Lang was in custody, along with half his executive team. His accounts were frozen. His empire collapsed. And as the dust settled, Nicholas returned to his office, standing once more at the window overlooking the city. Grey Tech was safe. David was found 2 days later, alive, shaken, but unharmed. Victor had kept him as leverage, but never had time to use him. Mark, true to form, disappeared again without warning, leaving behind nothing but a note taped to Nicholas's desk. "I think we passed the test this time. Call me if you need to clean up any more messes." Nicholas smiled to himself. The janitor was gone. But the company was still standing. Stronger than ever. And now, Nicholas finally understood something he hadn't before. Sometimes, the people you overlook are the ones who end up saving you. And sometimes, the dirtiest work is the most important.